In this video, we will discuss how to create a GBV assessment in Progress V4. The objectives of this session are to cover when to create a GBV assessment, how to complete the GBV assessment form, and when and how to complete a safety plan. Once you have created an SGBV case and you have documented the incident, the next step in the case management process is the assessment, to conduct a GBV assessment to identify the needs and the wants of the survivor. How we would do this in V4 is we would go to the GBV case that we have created and we would first do a review. We would look at the basic information included in the GBV case. Now, if we have just created the case and just documented the incident, then we would already know what exactly is here. But if it has been a while since we created the case, we have now done the interview with the survivor, collected the information, it's important to go back and to review the information first. So I will quickly scroll down and just look at the basic information that I've already collected. So here I will look at what specific needs have been indicated and by who. I will look at quickly the case narrative. I will look to see if there's any existing assessments and if there's any other safety plans. I will look at the incidents. And now, having seen a basic overview, I see that an assessment does need to still be done. Now, the first question that needs to be asked when completing V4 documentation is, for what purpose are we collecting the information? So obviously, if we are doing the direct service provision, we will be conducting an assessment for all cases that we are providing services for so that we can identify their needs. If a partner is doing GBV case management and they are responsible for providing those services, then they also would always complete an assessment for all incidents and all GBV cases that are documented. For those of us who are doing oversight of GBV case management, it's possible that not all GBV cases will include an assessment. And we can define for which cases an assessment is necessary as part of our GBV module SOPs for V4. It is important to note that at any given time, only one active assessment can be ongoing. So if you were to create an assessment, as long as it is pending, you will not be able to create a new assessment. Once the assessment is completed, you will then be able to create a new assessment. So it is possible for one GBV case to have multiple assessments, but not multiple open assessments. Now that we have determined it is appropriate for us to create a GBV assessment for this case, I will now go to the ribbon in this GBV case file, and I will click on Add. You will now notice that there's a GBV assessment here, and I will click on that. Alternatively, I could scroll down to the assessment section in the case file, and I could click on this plus next to the assessment. I will do that. And you will notice then a new GBV assessment form arises. The sections of the SGBV assessment form are General, which is where we capture the basic administrative information about that assessment. There's an overview of the care arrangement and specific needs, so it's more of a reference point to allow you to see existing care arrangements and specific need codes. There's the Consent section, which again covers what consent the survivor has provided for sharing information. There's the Interview Details, which covers the assessment interview. There are assessment details, so what your findings are from the interview, the recommendations based upon that, and then there are the referrals or any actions that are taken based upon those recommendations. And if necessary, then a review by the supervisor to approve any actions planned on being taken. We will go through each of these sections in detail below. Again, as with any other section, until the assessment is saved, there will be no unique identifier provided. Once we push save, it will be provided. We have organized the assessment form to follow the case management process as well as we have tried to keep all of the required fields as high up on the form as possible to allow you to complete the red asterisk fields and then save to prevent you losing any data from cuts in connectivity or anything like that. The first section is general. Underneath this, you will see the SGBV assessment details. This is the administrative data for the SGBV assessment form. All of this will be automatically populated or is pre-populated based upon the time at which you save the initial assessment. Now, you can go back and update these eventually, but for the time being, we will skip this because it will automatically be generated when we save. This SGBV case and the individual info are also drawn from other forms, and so there's nothing to be completed here. Next, you will see the care arrangements and specific needs section. This is not requiring any additional action either. It is more as a reference so that you can look and see what care arrangements are and any specific needs that we need to think about as we do the assessment. The next section is the consent. This is very similar to the consent that we saw in the GBV incident and in other locations. This is asking the date that you did the consent counseling. So we can say it does not automatically default. So we can say it happened on the date when. And then there's the question about whether or not the person agrees to share this information. If they agree to any information sharing, you will mark yes. Even if there are exceptions. When you mark yes, then it will say except with the following partners. And once we save, we can then put specific exceptions. So they do not want to share this with the hospital, or they do not want to share this with this partner. For right now, because I have not saved yet, I'm going to just say does not want to share with the... If the person is able to provide their own consent, then the answer is no. If they are not able to provide consent, then the answer is yes, and you would need to then indicate who is providing consent on their behalf. So whether it's a father, mother, brother, sister, grandmother, grandfather, and let's say it's the sister. If the person is registered in V4, you would enter it on this one. If they are not, you would type it here. And then if they are a child, do they provide their assent? Now, once you have completed this consent, we've now actually completed all mandatory fields for the assessment. And so I would suggest that you go ahead at this moment and save so that you do not lose what you have completed up to this point. And now I know that it's saved because I have a unique identifier. I am not done by any means with the assessment form, but at least now I know my record is saved. And if you have problems with connectivity, I would recommend as you put in information, you just periodically push on the save button so that you can then continue to add information. Now that I've saved, I can then put in this exception. So she did not want to share with the legal partner, and so that is going to be partner 1. I'm going to select that, and then I push add. And so now I know who I'm not allowed to share with, but everyone else that is appropriate, I can share with. You will notice that on this form, we will have 2 areas of consent. There is this general consent, which is the same across all the different modules, that is about information sharing and consent counseling. And then below we will have consent that is much consistent with the GBV-IMS format that you might be familiar with. Moving down, the next 2 questions are regarding mandatory reporting. The questions read, if mandatory reporting laws apply to this incident, if they do, then you would change this to either yes, and it was reported to the authorities, or yes, they do, but it was not reported to the authorities. If this is not a case for mandatory reporting laws apply, then you would type in does not apply. This would be defined based upon your case management and interagency SOPs, and this should be then reflected in your GBV SOPs for Progress V4. In this case, I'm going to say this does not apply. And then was the survivor informed on mandatory reporting laws prior to the incident being reported to authorities? So if it does not apply, it would be left blank. If it did apply, then you would either say yes, so that means that you did explain to them during your introduction and engagement about mandatory reporting laws, and you then explain to them once they describe the incident to you that you were going to be reporting it. Or no, meaning that you did not explain and or you did not tell them specifically that you have reported their incident to the authorities. As I marked do not apply, then this would be left blank. The next section is the interview details. So this is where you will explain who did the interview, where you did it, giving the basics just around the context. So if I did the interview, then I would search here and I would type in, I can start with the first letter or so of my name. And then I found my name. I can put in my organization. I can type in where I did this if I think so. This would be at the, I would type in the date that this was completed. This happened on, if there was a language, and then if there was an interpreter was necessary, you can type in the interpreter's name. Any of this information that you don't have can be left blank as there are not asterisks, but it is useful to have an idea for record keeping. If this case had happened to be transferred, that they would know when and who did the interview. Here is where you're going to put in your interview notes for the assessment. This is going to be your overall findings. In the incident details on the incident form, that is where you indicated or noted down the incident in the voice of the survivor. Here is where you will be noting down your observation. So the survivor presents as nervous and quiet. She's not well kept. The things that we would do as observation to kind of get an idea of the status of the well-being of the survivor, any other things that we would observe. You can then also note down anything that is useful in terms of the assessment points. Again, this is a formatted text box, so you're able to do any underlining, aligning, bullet points, etc. Now, based upon this, so what needs to be in your interview notes is enough for you then to be able to go back or in real time to then draw your findings around the assessment for that. The next section is the assessment. First, you will complete who it was done by searching on the magnifying glass. You can search for yourself or whoever was the person who completed it. You would then complete the date that the assessment was done. And then if there are any other observations during the assessment. Next, you'll notice there are sections for safety assessment, health assessment, psychosocial well-being assessment, legal assistance, economic well-being, education, durable solutions, and other needs. For each of these, you will have both what your assessment is as well as any referral note. This is just a note prior to then discussing with the survivor about what action they would like to be taken. So for my safety assessment, I have noted that the survivor does not report being in immediate danger, but does want to communicate this with the police so that they are aware. And additionally, because the perpetrator is the partner, that we would recommend doing a safety plan. So then from this, the safety service referral note is just recommend referring to police station 1. For the health assessment, since the survivor was raped, medical attention is appropriate. They need to be urgently attended to because the incident occurred 2 days ago. So we're within that 72 hours, so that needs to be urgently done. Legal assessment is that the legal action can apply to the situation, but the survivor does not seem interested. So we will follow up with that, but it does not seem any action would be taken. Psychosocial well-being, we discussed that they are just exhibiting signs of trauma. So we work with them on calming techniques and suggest maybe having a session next week. Education, they have no identified needs. Economic, they are employed, they have control of their own resources, so there's no need identified. Durable solutions, the survivor is a member of the host community, so there's no specific need identified. and other needs, so that she did mention that her child is in need of a birth certificate in case any action was needed to be taken. So once you've completed each of the assessment areas, you would then do an analysis, which is a summary of your findings. So overall, the survivor seems to be... So in the analysis, you would just give your overall findings from this. And then from your recommendations, what I usually would do is I would just outline. So recommend safety, refer to the police and safety plan, health, medical treatment for rape, psychosocial, trauma calming techniques, as well as weekly So basically all of the findings that up here that we would then discuss with the survivor, you would then include here in your recommendations. This does not mean that this is what is going to happen. This is just what your recommendations are. And once you've discussed this with the survivor, you will then go down to the referral section. This is where we talk through really what action will actually be taken based upon the desires of the survivor. For those of you who are familiar with the GBV-IMS, this is the section that looks exactly like the GBV-IMS form. So the first question is did you refer the client to safety services? And if no, then you would mark no, but she had said yes, she did want referral. And so did they consent to this referral? Yes. And then you'll notice that the note I made above the safety service referral automatically comes down here. So you don't have to retype things twice if the person does agree with that. The next is, did you refer the client to a health service? Yes or no? I asked her and she said no. And so then I need to answer why not. And she said she did not want it because she was afraid of her husband finding out who works in that hospital. So she declined that by the survivor. So no referral made. Did you refer the client to a psychosocial well-being service? Now, because we are the one providing that service, I'm going to mark no. And then it says, if no, why not? And it's because we are the ones providing that service. So suggest follow-up appointment. Next, did you refer the client to economic well-being? No, and the reason is if you remember above that she seems independent in terms of her finances, so the service was not applicable. Did you refer the client to legal assistance services? No, we did not. And if not, if you remember above, we discussed that it does apply, but she does not want to take legal action. So we would say that she referral declined by survivor. And then none. Did you refer the client to education services? No, and if you remember above as well, she has completed her education, so this is not applicable. Did you refer the client to durable solutions? And again, no. And if no, referral to durable solutions, why not? And the reason again is because it doesn't apply as she's from the host community. And then finally, did you refer the client to other services? And then for this we would mark yes, because she said she wanted documentation, so we asked her if she wanted to be referred to the documentation services, and so we would say yes, she did consent to that. And so referred to UNHCR. You will notice that these questions align with the GBV-IMS in terms of the yes, the no, and then if no, why not? Now that I've completed the referral, I would review this with the survivor to make sure they are clear about all the referrals they have accepted, they've declined. This is the review section. If you need review by your supervisor before taking action upon a case, then you would then have your supervisor complete this note and say, the above looks fine, or if they have any comments, and then they can indicate who that person is. Whoever provided that feedback, and then whatever date they completed it on. Now the next question is about a safety plan. So safety planning is when you support a survivor to identify structures within their lives that can help them to mitigate risk when violence occurs. So according to our above assessment, that a safety plan would be applicable. So here it says, is a safety plan needed? I'm going to mark yes because it is appropriate. And I see that currently there is no safety plan done. Everything else on this form now is completed. The rest of it is just for review for reference. So here you see there are safety plans. Are there any existing interventions done? Are there any existing referrals and incidents and other things such as this? So we have now completed the assessment form. I'm going to save to make sure that all of my changes are done. Now, as part of this assessment, or as part of the first step of the case action plan, but usually as part of the assessment, if I have indicated that a safety plan is needed, then I would want to complete a safety plan with the survivor. Not all cases will have a safety plan, but for those where it is appropriate, as outlined in your interagency SOPs or in your internal case management SOPs, we would recommend you completing the safety plan. There are two ways to add a safety plan to the assessment. It's either in the ribbon under Add, you can create a safety plan here, or you can come down to Safety Plan and you can click on the plus here. I will do that. When I click on the safety plan, this pop-up box will appear. As you can tell, because it says new safety plan, it is not yet saved. The safety plan is composed of 6 different sections. There's the general section, which covers the administrative information, so the basics of when the safety plan was created, etc., the status of it. There's the overview of safety, resources, safety preparedness, safety strategies, and next step. A safety plan should be completed with the survivor and done by someone who has experience creating safety plans. The safety plan details will be automatically generated, although you can modify who it was created by and the start date. So this is the safety plan status. So now, is it ongoing? It's completed, or it is no longer needed. So currently it'll be ongoing. The individual info, the GBV case, and the ownership all will be automatically populated. So the first section of the safety plan is the overview of safety. So the is a safety plan needed automatically generates based upon the answer to the response we gave in the assessment. And so now the question is was the safety plan developed with the survivor? So yes, we're doing this with the survivor now, and we have not yet completed this, so the completion date is not filled in. You should make sure to complete the safety plan date once you have completed the safety plan. The first section of the safety plan says identify safety concerns. So here we would talk through what are the concerns, all safety concerns that the survivor has. So in this case, the issue is intimate partner violence. So her concerns are around violence that's being perpetrated by her husband after he drinks on the weekends. You would type this here. The next section is the resources. So now is where we review with the survivor and we think through various resources in their life that would be able to support them to mitigate or avoid or reduce risk. So the first thing we need to think about is what economic or material resources do they have access to? And as we mentioned with this survivor, she has her own employment and she does have access to her own money. So that's an important resource in terms of financial. So we would note that here. Relationships. So what relationships does she have that she could lean on when she's feeling insecure? Are there neighbors nearby? Is there family, parents that she could go to or talk to? Are there siblings? Who could she talk to that or work with to then provide support during this time? Community help. Are there any other structures in the community or individuals in the community that she could lean on and get support from? And any other resources that might be useful. The next is safety preparedness. So then we talk about what steps did the survivor identify as options to minimize risk of further harm for herself before violence occurs. And so what we think about here is that we obviously never blame a survivor for the violence that's being perpetrated against them. But what we're trying to do is with this safety plan is to mitigate the effects of the violence or the consequences of the violence when it occurs. So what we're trying to do is we try to identify any noticeable patterns around the violence or triggers around the violence so that when something is occurring, she can take steps to try to minimize the risk. So what we have identified is that oftentimes the violence occurs after her husband has been out drinking on the weekends. So we now know a time. So the weekends tends to be the higher risk. We also know about the drinking. So the question is that are there things that she could do around this time to then minimize risk? Could she lock her and the children in the bedroom prior to him arriving home on the weekends? Could she go stay with family members on the weekends? Are there specific things that can be done to minimize the perpetrator's access to them, the children, and to her when they are intoxicated or on the weekends? These type of things would be identified steps that you could do. So safety strategies, what actions did the survivor identify as options to mitigate the risks when the violence happens? So this is different in terms of the first is trying to prevent it from happening, minimize it. The second is that to mitigate the risks when it actually happens. So if the violence happens, what could she do? So if the person becomes violent, is there a house nearby they could go to? Is there any other things that could do to try to prevent the violence from being as bad as it potentially could be? And then the next steps is what steps did the survivor identify as options to minimize the risk after leaving home? So basically what we look at is if the survivor was to start thinking about leaving the relationship, the abusive relationship, then what are some of the steps that would need to be done to minimize their risks? So helping them think through what would they need to do? What would they need to have set up? How do they protect themselves if they have left their home? And at the end of this, there's a question about how long did it take you to develop this safety plan with the survivor? This is something that should take some time. It really will require a lot of analysis and thought by the survivor. So what you would do is you would then indicate base here. Once you've completed the plan with the survivor, you would figure out how much time that took. And then at the end, you would then go back up and you would say the date, whatever date you've finished this at, you would complete it. And then you would save. Now, this is something that you would then want to review with the survivor before they leave and during follow-up sessions. Now, when I save and close, now when I go back to my SGBV assessment, you'll notice under safety plan, I now have an ongoing safety plan. Once the plan is actually completed, I can click on the safety plan number. I can go back. Now that it's completed, so she and I have completed it together, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to say it was completed on this date, and then I'm going to save and close. And now you'll see that I have a safety plan. It is completed. If I was to go back to the top, and I go back to my GBV case, You will notice that on my assessments, now I have an assessment and I have a safety plan. If I would like to update my assessment, I can always just come to my case and click on the assessment number and then modify it as necessary. So my assessment status is now completed. I've completed my assessment and I'm going to save and close. And it says that was today. And then if I go back to my case, I can see that my assessment is closed. So this is how to complete an assessment. The next step in the case management process is doing a case action plan and referrals and interventions. Thank you very much.